A report by the Energy Industries Council, or EIC, reveals a widening gap between the industry's current reality and the ambitious net zero targets set by policymakers to be achieved by 2050. CEO Stuart Broadley outlines the challenges facing the industry and what needed to be delivered on its net zero commitments.
Findings are quite revealing, actually, and probably the headline finding is that nearly 90% of those we interviewed just no longer believe at least the interim net zero targets, which for some countries are 2030, some are 2035, are achievable. The main reasons for that are, when you're in the energy supply chain, wherever you are, whether you're one of the larger manufacturers or one of the largest service companies, or further down, perhaps one of the innovators, anywhere in the world, it's ultimately about, are you seeing orders coming into your business that are related to net zero? So that would be offshore wind or onshore wind or solar, or it might be hydrogen or carbon capture. And vast majority of companies are seeing so little of that business coming into their order intake, much less than they had planned for and what they had understood was required to meet their country's net zero targets, that they've concluded that there are clearly delays in the cascading of ambition into the reality of country-specific and indeed global net zero policies.
Stuart also highlighted the lack of funding for certain sectors of the global energy industry as an obstacle to progress.
We see new nuclear, which has nearly 50% FID rates globally now. Of all the projects announced, 50% are funded. Why? Because more countries now regard new nuclear, large nuclear projects as complying with and supporting their net zero strategies. Oil and gas arguably does not, although the oil and gas industry is working hard, of course, to go on its own decarbonization journey. So you then look at the technologies which are classically renewable and drive directly towards net zero. And if, for instance, you look at offshore wind, less than 6% of the world's offshore wind projects that are currently announced out there, and they're announced because countries require offshore wind, in many cases, to be critical to achieving net zero. Less than 6% are funded. I mean, that clearly is a pretty damning, outcome from what is seen globally as one of the easier technologies to apply to achieve net zero. Then you carry on into some of the harder to abate, sectors of industry, such as the need to have hydrogen to replace gas, or the need to store, to capture and store CO2. Both of those sectors are, around the 3% funded rate, FID rate. So if you like, in simple terms, the vast majority of projects announced are not yet funded, and therefore, from a supply chain point of view, are not real.
Achieving their net zero targets cannot be accomplished by any single country alone, says Stuart. He underscores the importance of learning from other nations and strengthening trade relationships to facilitate the journey to net zero.
I don't think it's easier to say that you look at one country, like the UK, which has undoubtedly seen success over the last 30, 40 years on its journey to net zero, and it's achieved a certain degree of definite progress towards that, although more to do. And I don't think it's easy for then another country to say, well, they've done it and we've not, somehow are we behind? Because each country has its own unique journey. So does a country have, as much offshore wind resource as the UK? Not every country does, and I don't believe, for instance, Malaysia does. So different technologies are required, different natural resources are available to you. I think the other thing that I would say is a lesson learned is no one country can achieve net zero on their own. You have to have a very collaborative, trade-based and technology-sharing approach to achieving net zero. Learn the lessons from other countries and how they've done it, but also then be happy to say, for my country, this is the solution that's right for us based upon our unique situation and our unique natural resources, but then collaborate and trade as much as you can to facilitate that journey. And I think countries any country that tries to do it too much on its own, it's definitely much harder, it's more expensive. Access to natural, to the resources and the supply chain you need will get harder. So I think those are probably helpful lessons for any country struggling a bit, or perhaps not struggling, but still in that process of working out the key roadmap to achieve net zero.